Converted Man here. So today I'm going to be analyzing and talking about this video from UK Christian Answers. It's been up 2 months and he hasn't answered any questions that have been asked in his comment section, but nonetheless I think that the issues that he raises have been addressed so many times before that they need to be addressed again because clearly nobody is listening to us.
In the first video I touched on the absurd idea of something coming from literally nothing.
Well, that didn't take long. So, special pleading. Why special pleading? Here's why. If he is talking about, because he's a Christian, I'm assuming that he's talking about the Christian version of God, then he has to be, I think, without wanting to strawman him, asserting that God ex alineoed the universe. Because all that existed was God and nothing else. So God made everything out of nothing. You still have a nothing that is there. You have something else doing something, acting on the nothing to bring forth something. But if you're going to say that an idea is absurd, then that idea still has to be absurd. Whether or not it's true or false is completely irrelevant. You have to not have special pleading for this exception to be made. It's absurd unless there's God. If God does it, then it's not absurd somehow.
Then I went on to talking about the absurdity or absurdities that would result if indeed our universe were infinite.
So this is a red herring, and it's relevant. Very few to any that I'm aware of cosmologists argue that the universe is infinite or has always been anymore. This is a philosophical idea, and very few skeptics for this idea still. So who's making this argument that the universe has always been, unless you mean a different thing, like reality has always existed? That statement would have to be true no matter if it makes sense or not. So whatever reality is. And then at some point during reality, the universe was there. And there you go. So if you're going to say that the infinite is absurd, then reality becomes absurd, because reality would have had to have been around an infinitely long time. But reality is timeless, so then it makes it okay somehow, I guess. I don't know. Moving on.
And then in the last video, I just looked at the seemingly absurd contradiction of postulating an eternal mechanism.
Man, I really want to agree with this, but darn it, this would be special pleading. I really want to say, yeah, you're right. An eternal mechanism is absurd, therefore God's absurd. Good game. But I can't, because I don't think you would want to have God be absurd. So to make the exception that God, who's eternal, isn't absurd, but some other eternal mechanism would be absurd, is special pleading. And I really wanted to agree with you, but I just can't because of logic.
Causing a temporal finite effect, namely the idea that an eternal quantum state can cause our universe even though our universe remains finite, and that kind of absurd contradiction there. And then finally I then looked at the absurd implication of retrocausality being one of the common aspects of current cosmological models that are being proposed that seek to get round the implications of the finitude of our universe, the fact that our universe does very strongly seem to be finite. So yeah, in this video I just wanted to conclude by looking at fine-tuning, but before I do that, yeah, I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail on the idea of something coming from literally nothing. I kind of glossed over that in the first video because, yeah, to me it is one of the most absurd notions that one can really entertain.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of fun here with the question marks and exclamations above his head as he's on his head as he's talking about these complex cosmological ideas. This is out of my field. I'm no scientist. I'm not even an amateur scientist. I'm at best an amateur logistician. But that being said, I kind of wonder what sort of degrees or expertise he has in cosmology. Now, that doesn't make his arguments fallacious, because to suggest that would be an appeal to lack of authority, which is fallacious. No. What I'm wondering is if he has any peer-reviewed publications in the field of cosmology. Probably not. I'm gonna guess no. That doesn't mean he hasn't studied this stuff and is well-versed in this stuff, but it does kind of make it hard to get on board with what he's saying. Now, if he had some sort of logically coherent argument against these cosmological models, then I could get on board with it. If he had some sort of peer-reviewed publication that explained why and how they were wrong, I could definitely get on board with it then, but he doesn't have either of those. And so his lack of qualifications are sort of a social barrier to us accepting what he says just because he's a Joe Schmo who cares what he says. On a logical front, I don't care that he lacks credentials. It doesn't matter on a logical front, because on a logical front, he might still have a logically coherent argument. The fact that he doesn't makes us have to be skeptical that he's being skeptical of these ideas, because we don't see any reason to dismiss these cosmological ideas other than he personally feels that they're absurd, which is nothing more than appeal to personal incredulity at this point. So add that to the number there, logical fallacy counter. What? Come on. Do it. Okay, you want me to say that I'm sorry you haven't been in any of my videos, like, forever. I'm sorry, okay? Can you put the number up there then? Alright, thank you. Thanks. I really am sorry. I love you.
It's so counterintuitive. It's so contrary to the sum of the entirety of all experience that not just I've had, but almost everybody that's ever existed has had, the idea of something literally coming into being from nothing.
Dang, nabbit, stop appealing to personal incredulity. It doesn't matter if it's counterintuitive. It doesn't matter if it goes against all experiences we've ever had. It's irrelevant. And the example I like to use, and I really got to find this clip on YouTube here. There was this clip. This guy drops a slinky that's stretched out, and they filmed it in slow motion. I just thought the whole thing would land on the ground all at once and collapse in on itself once it landed in the ground. No, it doesn't. It actually takes the time to collapse in on itself before it falls to the ground. That was counterintuitive to me. I didn't expect that to happen, but that's what happened. It doesn't matter what I think is going to happen or what I want to happen or what I've expected to happen or what I've experienced in the past. Reality is whatever reality is, and how we feel about it is irrelevant. It is not, it doesn't matter, okay? It just doesn't matter. If we discover tomorrow that the moon is made out of cheese, that isn't what we thought. That isn't what we expected. It goes against a lot of things that we thought. And it would change a lot of how we think about things. And it would have to, because it is so counterintuitive, because it is so bizarre. But what are we to do? Just cross our arms and deny reality because it seems absurd? Because we don't like it? Because we don't understand it? No! We can't do that! And that's what you're asking us to do. You're saying, well, it doesn't make sense. That something can come from nothing. It just doesn't make sense, so it can't be that. You don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know anything at this point. We don't know that it was nothing. We don't know that it was something. We don't know. That's the answer. But wherever the data leads is where the data leads. Wherever the facts go, that's where we need to follow, regardless of how absurd it turns out to be. Maybe reality is all made up of miniature lobsters. Okay, that's weird, but if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. And maybe those lobsters are made up of even smaller lobsters, and it goes on ad infinitum. And that doesn't make it, or at least to our perception, ad infinitum. That doesn't make any sense to us, but if that's the way reality is, then that's the way reality is. We have to find out what it is. We can't assume anything based on absurdities. To do so is nothing more than an appeal to personal incredulity. I think I made my point, but I wanted to make sure that I did. Did I make it? Thumbs up if I made my point. If I didn't make my point, also thumbs up, because it's YouTube.
But it's grown some. It's had some momentum, I should say, in recent years on the back of people like Lawrence Krauss, that have kind of argued that something can come into being from nothing through the mechanism of quantum mechanics. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that quickly first.
Uh-oh. My lobster sense is tingling. Or that just might be something I ate. I'm not sure. But at any rate, I think that we're going to have some natural language problems. Uh-oh. Because Lawrence Krauss means something else by nothing than other people do. I really wish he'd named it something else. I'm just going to call it N2, referring to his version of nothing. We'll see if our guy here makes a natural language blunder. But he knows cosmology. I'm sure he knows cosmology, right? Because he was talking about it earlier. He's not going to make that blunder, is he? Is he? He is, isn't he?
A quantum vacuum state isn't nothing. Quite simply. Lawrence Krauss, as far as I'm concerned, is really just been guilty of appropriating words inappropriately. A quantum state and quantum mechanics are things that are governed by laws. A quantum state has behavioural traits. It has properties. It's a sea of energy. Very often it can behave violently, and it can be described. Nothingness, on the other hand, it has no properties, no potentialities, no behavioural traits, nothing that can actually be described.
Dang nabbit, I knew you were going to do it. So you want to accuse Lawrence Krauss of equivocation, is the word that you're looking for, by the way. Who's to say that Krauss can't add to the word's definition? Just asking. Because words often have more than one definition. Can Lawrence Krauss's definition of nothing and two be added to the current definition? Sure, why not? It makes things a little bit more confusing, but I can't complain about it, really, because it's language, and language is weird. Night, what am I referring to? When it's night, or am I referring to, sure, good night? You don't know, I don't know at this point. So words and how they sound and all that is confusing, but I'm just saying, what kind of complaint is this? Oh, he's using a word that he shouldn't use. Okay, it's equivocation, right? But he actually defines his word, right? So it's not really equivocation. It's just making a word into, giving a new definition to an existing word. Like I said, I wish he'd invented a new word for it, but whatever, okay? That doesn't negate Lawrence's points, whatever they might be. I don't think you've read his book. I haven't read his book, so I don't know what his points are. But simply because he's using a word incorrectly doesn't negate his argumentation at all. If he was not clarifying the word, and he was equivocating with nothing, back and forth, then there could be some problems with his argument. But you need to demonstrate that that's what he's doing, and you didn't do that, so bad on you.
It's completely different. So really, in all simple logic, you can't ascribe behaviour and traits and energies and properties to nothingness.
Oh, right, I almost forgot about the whole part where you tell us what nothing is. Can you give me an example of nothing, please? Can you show me nothing? No, you can't. We got into this problem a long time ago. Some of you will remember it, some of you won't. But a long time ago, I had this whole conversation, if you will, with you that comment and with somebody that made the same statement about nothing before. We don't have an example of what nothing really is. Okay? And until we do, it is nothing more than a construct in our brain. It is a word that we've given a definition to that doesn't make it real in reality. Okay? Dragon. I'll go with this. Dragon has a definition. Dragon, you can draw a dragon. You can paint a dragon. You can, say that this, that, or the other thing is a dragon as long as it falls within certain parameters, and there are different parameters for dragons. There are certain pictures of dragons that I wouldn't call a dragon, but that somebody else could call a dragon, because what it is to different cultures is slightly different. That being said, it doesn't make it real simply because we can define it. We can't define things into existence or define things out of existence. If we could, I would come up with the definition that I have $1 million and have $1 million. Tax-free, of course. But we can't do that. It doesn't work. So, if you don't have an example of nothing, all you have is the definition of the word. You don't know what it is or what it isn't. Neither do I. Neither does anybody. What we have is an idea, a construct, something that we've come up with in our brains, or in a brain and it was shared, but nonetheless it is an idea that we agree upon. When we say the word nothing, we mean certain things by it. Just like when I say the word zero, I mean a certain thing by it. If nothing and zero are equivalent, I can drop one and just use the other one instead. So if zero is what we're talking about, an absence of things, is still a concept. It doesn't really exist. So what you're trying to do basically is say, I know everything that there is to know about something that we can't know anything about because I don't have any example of it, other than the definition itself. What you want to do here is form a probabilistic syllogism. If nothing exists and nothing has the properties that we've ascribed to nothing, then blah 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 blah. Okay? And I said blah 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 because your conclusion will depend upon other premises that you have in that argumentation. But there you go. I gave you two things that you needed in the syllogism to make it work, and it has to be a probabilistic syllogism because we don't know if nothing actually exists or not. Then you can make your argument. But it will be dependent upon the other premises and the conclusion that you're drawing from it. And it would have to be a probabilistic conclusion as well, because you have a probabilistic syllogism. But you don't have that. You just say nothing is this, 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 and because you've asserted it as being true, I'm going to call it special knowledge, because you would have to have special knowledge of reality in order to assert anything about something to which we have no examples of. In this case, nothing. The only example of it we have is the definition itself, which doesn't mean that it's a real thing. It's a real definition, but it might or might not be a real thing. Is everyone following? Good. Put down your hand, gibberish. What do you want? What do you want from me? Why are you always bugging me in the middle of my videos? Gibberish, put your hand down. Alright. Anyways, I also blame Matt Slick. Moving on.
That's actually what Krauss has done in calling a quantum state nothing. An analogy that I might use is, in recent years, cosmologists have also uncovered what they would call dark energy and dark matter. Now, no one calls these nothing, because they're not nothing. We don't know much about them, and we have difficulty describing them. But we don't call them nothing because we know there's something. We just don't quite know what they are. Dark energy that is involved in the expansion of the universe. But we haven't resorted to calling that nothing in the way that Lawrence Krauss tries to call a pre-existing quantum state. For example, I mentioned Sean Carroll in the last video I did, and his recent debate back in March of this year, I think it was, where he debated William Lane Craig. The entire debate surrounded cosmology and cosmic origins, and the entire time Sean Carroll is discussing and postulating a pre-existing quantum state. At no time does he ever call that state nothing. Not once in a debate does he ever attempt to identify quantum mechanics or pre-existing quantum state as being...
In the words of Monty Python, get on with it!
But let's go further, let's run with it, okay? Even if we could say, somehow, that something could come into being from literally nothing, even then, the proponent, the proposer, let's say Lawrence Krauss or whoever, is left with the absurd notion of trying to defend how it's just a universe that can come into being from nothingness.
Why can't X, Y, and Z come into being from nothing? Yeah, that's what he's gonna say. Here we go.
And why not anything and everything else? Why not lemons and lemmings and Lego bricks and Lawrence Krauss himself?
What's so interesting about this questioning of, well, how is it that nothing can only make a universe, which is the proposed idea here. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that I've proven, using science, that the universe can, or did, come from nothing. And somebody like this guy raises their hand and says, well, how come it didn't make a cow, or an airplane, or just a human? I don't know. It didn't. This is what was produced from nothing. I don't know why it did it this way. I don't know that's what it produced. I don't know if it can or cannot produce anything else. All I know is that this is the answer. That's all I know for sure. In a similar way, the theist can't answer why God made the universe. Why didn't God just make us? Why not just make one human? Why make anything at all? Those sort of questions a theist can't really answer without extraordinary special pleading and circular argumentation referring back to their own holy book. There are some questions that can't be answered by both sides of the issue. And complaining that you don't have the answer to why it can't do this, that, or the other thing is irrelevant, because if we have the answer, then we have the answer. And why it's that answer might not even be a question that has any real meaning to it. Why does 1 plus 1 equal 2? And why is 1 and 1 11? I don't know. Just is. Get on with it.
Why just a universe popping into being from nothing and not anything else? That would be the absurd proposition that the atheist is then going to defend. It really would be the elephant in the room. Literally. Why is there not suddenly an elephant in the room? If suddenly there's a universe, why not an elephant?
Now, you'll note that the counter isn't going up because these aren't really logical fallacies. They're just asking questions. If this is a persuasionary dialogue, and I'm going to assume that it is a persuasionary dialogue, then these are formal fallacies and not informal. And my formal fallacy counter is mad at me for using the informal fallacy counter and not him, so he's not going to appear in this video. I have to have a talk with him. It's really getting bad. Anyways, but let me put it this way. Once you have a universe, you don't have nothing anymore. If you started with 0, and then, bing, universe, the 0's gone now. It can't make anything more. It can't do anything more. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore because now there's stuff. So there is no more nothing to make other things from, which answers this whole idea, well, why aren't we continuously seeing things pop into existence, which is something WLC has said and something that I think he's hinting at here. But as far as, again, if we're going to assume, for the sake of argument, that the answer to where everything came from is nothing, and then to ask questions about why it didn't bring anything into existence other than the universe, it's just as meaningful as asking where God came from to a theist, to many theists, because it's a nonsensical question to ask to them. So, from my perspective as a skeptic, I don't think that the universe came from nothing, but I don't think that I know anything about where the universe came from. So I can't have any position on where the universe came from. I don't know. I just don't know. I'm willing to accept that it came from nothing. I'm willing to accept it came from God. I'm willing to accept that it came from some other intelligence. I'm willing to accept that it just is, and that's it, that there is no answer. I'm willing to accept whatever the data says, because that's what the data says. And I'm also willing to accept the idea that I could be wrong, or that the data could be wrong, but I'll go with the data until we find out that it is wrong, and then I'm willing to revise what I thought at that time. The theist is stuck with their answer. They can't change their mind. This is a big difference between skepticism and theology.
Okay, moving on to fine tuning, which is what I wanted to just briefly go on in this video, and how there's no escape when we look at fine tuning. There's no escape from having to embrace the absurd in some way, shape, or form when we look at the phenomenon of fine tuning. Now, what do we mean by fine tuning? When cosmologists and scientists are talking about fine tuning, they're referring to the constants and quantities that we've discovered that exist in the initial conditions of the universe.
You know what? I've heard this argument before, so I'm just going to fast forward because I need to get to the point where I tell you why you're wrong. Alright, we don't want to hear chipmunk version of you. So, this boils down to big numbers equals God somehow, which is nothing more than special pleading and special knowledge and appeal to personal incredulity, because it doesn't make sense how it could all just come together on its own. Alright, so let's go with a couple of simple and correct analogies. If I look at a rock that's perfectly balanced on another rock, and go, man, how did it get there? How did that happen? And I say, well, it's just impossible that it got there on its own. God had to put it there. That is the same thing that you're doing with the universe. If we rewind that event, we'll find out that it wasn't put there by God. It was put there by natural forces. That things had to erode away in a certain way, and the numbers would be ginormous for how unlikely it is that it would happen to be that way. Yet, there's the rock, balanced on the other rock, without any need for any supernaturalistic explanation whatsoever. Another one would be that we have to pretend that we are water, and we find ourselves in a puddle, and we think, oh, isn't it wonderful how this puddle was made just for me, when that's not the case. The water made the puddle, not the other way around. The puddle wasn't made just for the water to be in. The universe, in and of itself, has certain constants, which are mathematical constructs, nothing to do with the likelihood of the universe being this way. So the big numbers really are a red herring, and the big numbers simply don't matter. It doesn't matter how unusual or bizarre it is. And beyond all that, we only have one example of a universe to look at. We don't have a different universe to look at and go, look, there's no life there, but there's life here. We don't do that. And the moon doesn't have the right conditions for life, at least as we know it. Mars might, and we might find some traces of life that is living on Mars right now, or has lived on Mars in the past. And other moons and other planets might also show signs of life. None of this means anything beyond the fact that carbon life isn't necessarily the only type of life that there could be. There could be other type of life, and we just don't know until we find it. If the universe was different, then it would be different, and if there was living creatures and organisms in there, then there would be living creatures and organisms in there. And it wouldn't mean anything more than that's the way it is. All this is, all fine-tuning has ever been, is an appeal to really, really big numbers that makes your argument sound sophisticated. But every time that we've heard this argument, and by we I mean the skeptics at large, and the atheists, agnostics, etc., the numbers change. So get your stuff together, guys, first of all. Decide on what the number is going to be. Is it 1 in a Google? Is it 1 in 10 bazillion to the power of 59? Whatever. Figure out what the numbers really are. There's no consistency there. Because maybe, just maybe, it's not a scientific idea. If it was, it would already be peer-reviewed and publication already. It would already be out there, and you could cite a paper on it. But you can't, because it's a philosophical idea with horrible argumentation used to support it. Now, if you could give me a syllogism that was logically coherent, then I could agree with you. But you can't, and you haven't, and I don't think that you will. You certainly don't have any empirical evidence that of anything other than I know these big numbers. You don't have any repeatable tests that we can run, and you haven't offered us a logically coherent argument. As far as atheism being absurd or anything else being absurd, so what? That doesn't make it false. It's what's called an ad hominem and or it's poisoning of the well. Either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's absurd. It could still be true. So we can't just say, hey, this is absurd. Well, what's absurd to me is a magical being that's always existed that can somehow desire for things to come into being, and they do. But that doesn't make it false. Just because it's absurd doesn't make it false. And just because it's absurd to me and others doesn't make it false. I'm open to the idea. I'm open to all ideas. But the idea has to be forwarded in a logically coherent manner. And if it's not, then I'm not open to it. I have to be skeptical of it. And unless and until we have a logically coherent argument, we have to continue to be skeptical of the conclusions.